What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today's video is from the line. We're going to be hearing from a caller that's decided to call in and try to prove either God to us or some other kind of crazy idea. So, if you want to fuck around and find out how crazy this call gets, then please stay tuned. Let's get to Michael, who's a theist. Hey there, Michael. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
I'm good. So basically, I want to talk about theism since I'm a theist. Are y'all open to that discussion?
Definitely.
Okay. So basically, I think the fine-tuning argument provides support and evidence for theism. So I guess before I present my argument, I should define some terms. So first, I think, and I want to make sure we agree on terms. So I think evidence is something that you would expect given a hypothesis was true. So take our fossil record, right? That's evidence for evolution because it's expected on evolution being true. The fossil record is how we see it, right? Certain phenotypic traits are found, from top to bottom in the fossil record, and they're distributed how we expect if evolution occurred, right? So do you agree with that notion of evidence?
As long as we can agree that that's one piece of evidence.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just given a definition of evidence and then an instance of that definition.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to put one minor caveat is that it will be evidence for a given hypothesis if it is expected on that hypothesis and not expected on another hypothesis. If two hypotheses have the same prediction, it can't be evidence of one versus the other.
Yeah, okay, wait. So that gets me to my second notion, which is support and evidence. So maybe that's what you mean by support and evidence. So I take support and evidence to be a piece of evidence which is more expected on one hypothesis than another.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so yeah, now we've understand the terms. I think that fine-tuning supports theism because I think life is more expected on theism than naturalism because life is morally valuable. Minds are morally valuable, right? And we clearly have minds. What is that on that argument?
I'm going to have to stop you right there because morals are like minds are required in order for morals to exist. So therefore, if you're saying that life existing is morally better, then you're sort of putting the cart before the horse, or maybe it's more of like a circular logic kind of evidence here because life has to exist.
Why do you think morality depends on mind?
Because it requires a mind to come to moral conclusions.
Right, but I can come to conclusions about physics, for example. That doesn't mean physics requires mind.
Here's what I would say. When it comes to morality or it comes to moral decision-making, to do that, you basically have to have preferences. You would have to say, this is better than that to some end. This fulfills some sort of goal. But the thing is, the things that have goals are things with minds. So talking about a moral order to the universe, you're basically already implying some sort of magnificent mind. I think it's implied in your premises, so it's a hidden premise.
Right. So I agree that moral decision making requires agents because you have to have someone making the decisions. But you talk about hypothetical reasons, so those are reasons we have given some end. But you're ignoring what many philosophers call categorical reasons, which are reasons we have independent of our ends. Why do you think those don't exist? If that's essentially your claim.
Well, actually, if one of the interesting, so you're talking about like categorical imperative from like Immanuel Kant and things like that, correct?
No, a categorical imperative is a particular instance of a categorical reason Kant got. Basically, I'll line out what I mean by these terms. So take a hypothetical reason. So commonly this is understood to be a reason in the following sense. If I have a desire for X and Y achieves X, then I have a reason to do Y, right? Okay, now a categorical reason is something I have a reason to do independent of me wanting to do X. So moral realists, for example, they think that we have categorical reasons not to torture people for fun or kill, young children, stuff like that, even if we wanted to. And that seems right to me. What's your issue with that?
Well, actually,
I
we
mean,
can continue to interrogate that a little bit. So, for example, why is it wrong to torture?
Why is it wrong to torture? I mean, there are multiple explanations. So if I was a utilitarian, I might say because it causes pain. If I was a deontologist, I might say because rights are violated.
Why is it bad to violate rights? Let's take the deontology route. Why is it bad to violate rights?
Right, so that's just going to be on the theory of fundamental truth, just like in mathematical theory, certain truths about the successor function and different hyper operations are fundamental truths, just like 1 + 1 = 2 is a fundamental truth.
Well, the thing is, 1 + 1 doesn't necessarily equal 2. That depends on which numeric system you have. If we're on binary, 1 + 1 is 0.
1 + 1 = 0 on a binary system, that may be true, right? But I don't think we're talking about the same thing then.
Well, the thing is, you're saying this is some sort of like absolute metaphysical sort of thing, and I'm just saying, no, it's a choice of axioms and definitions.
So I'm not making a claim about every mathematical language. Like, take, for example, the laws of logic.
Well, the thing is that you are claiming something is objectively the case, that something needs to be true. And I'm pointing out that
when I say objectively,
are absolutes we can find are rather subjective. Or
when I say objectively, I do not mean.
Sorry. He was talking while you were talking, Aaron, and I couldn't hear what you were saying, but I can unmute him.
I think it's part. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's on part because of the delay. Mike, can you hear us again?
Hold on, I'm getting him unmuted right now.
So wait, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We hear you now.
Now we can.
Okay. By objective, I don't mean universal, such that it's true in like every language or something like that. Like, take, for example, the statement chairs exist, right? That's certainly true given what we mean by chairs in the English language. But if by the word chairs, I don't know, other language means like unicorns, then obviously that's false. So I'm not making a claim about how words are used or symbols are used in every language, right? I'm talking about the propositions they express. So I'm not saying 1 + 1 = 2, right? I'm talking about certain mathematical objects, namely numbers, as they're understood in basic arithmetic governed by the Pineo axiom, right? So, like, 0.
So within a particular mathematical system, 1 + 1 = 2, sure. And of course, if someone comes along and they say,
I'm talking about the
Pineo axioms, we're just going to
specifically.
Right, but
Michael, if you can't,
those.
Listen, it can't. This can't work if you're going to talk over each other. So, Michael, if Aaron is talking, if Michael, if Aaron's talking, please let him finish, and then you can, interject. Okay?
Of course. My bad. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So we can say that, under the Pineo axioms, using base 10, 1 + 1 = 2. Sure. If someone comes along and says, are the Pineo axioms fundamental? They sure seem intuitive to us, but to say that they're fundamental, that they couldn't possibly be wrong, that I think is a harder thing to say. And what you're going with in saying that, rights are fundamental and should never be violated, we can always keep asking that question, why? And if we just say, it's an axiom, then we've left objectivity. We're now just declaring things. And while I definitely want to preserve rights, I would give a more what would look like a utilitarian argument to that. And ultimately, the reason I have any sort of moral compunctions, the way I feel like that any sort of moral argument is going to be compelling, is that it gets down to my most fundamental goals of what actually motivates me. If I want to make some sort of imperative statement, ultimately I have to care about why that conclusion matters. For the example, I am hungry. The sandwich will fulfill my hunger. Therefore, I ought to eat. The whole reason that the ought even possibly works is because of something that fundamentally matters to me. If I'm not hungry, then there's no reason I ought to eat, for example. And that, I think, is a more fundamental way of how we get to oughts. But nonetheless, I think this is all kind of a distraction from your main point. I think you could go with your argument about fine-tuning without having to bring in a moral dimension. All you have to say, I think, is that you would think, or you're going to argue, that fine-tuning is unexpected on naturalism, but more expected on theism. Is that correct?
I am saying that, but I'm saying that for a particular reason, and it's God's goodness. I don't see how the moral dimension is inseparable is separable from what I'm talking about.
Which God?
I don't, adhere to any particular religion.
Then how do you know he's good? Like, how do you define good? Like, I don't know. It just kind of feels like you're just saying, oh, God's goodness. And it's just this vague, abstract sort of idea about God's goodness. That you saying, oh, it's God's goodness or whatever, it literally means jack shit to me. Like, I don't know what you're talking about when you say God's goodness.
Right. Okay. So I'll answer two questions there. The first being, how do I know he's good? So I'm not making any claim to know that there is some being that has certain properties. All I'm making a claim is that if we have a hypothesis that posits such an entity with such a property, the things we see, namely life, are more expected. And then answer your other question about God. Well, can I finish, please?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. And so the second question was what I mean by God's goodness. And what I mean by that is that he's just going to do the right thing in all the cases. Right, that he's obligated.
Right. You understand that by saying that God has goodness or is good, you're directly making a claim about God, like a positive claim about God that you then have to support with evidence. Like, I feel like you're trying to skirt around this need for evidence.
No, what I'm doing here is I'm describing the properties of an entity posited by a particular hypothesis, and then looking at all the evidence around me, all the data, all the sense data, and saying that sense data is more expected on this hypothesis than another. Like, take a God that's evil, right? Well, given that I think life is good, we would not expect to see life on such an evil God, but we would, given God is good, how I've defined it, and given that life is good.
If I may, life is something we might expect on an evil God, so that way there's something to torture.
Okay.
So life is expected on both good God theism and evil God theism. On evil God theism, you got to have life, so you got something you can torture.
I don't think that's necessarily true. So, for example, we might say something like this: biological life isn't needed. If we wanted something to truly be tortured, we might have like just brains, right, that aren't in bodies able to move. We might just have them constantly feeling pain. But that's not at all what we see.
Can I just point out that this entire line of argumentation that you're putting forth there, Michael, is purely subjective in nature. Like, you haven't said anything at all that's not like subjective to your own opinion about this God that you have yet to ground in reality. You haven't given us any kind of evidence whatsoever to actually ground this God in reality, and you've barely even defined this God or what is good in order to demonstrate that this good God seems to exist. So, I mean, I feel like you're just throwing out either buzzwords or popular words or something like that. Like, you're just throwing out terms in hopes that people will either make up their own definitions or their own understandings of what you're trying to say here. It just sounds very obfuscated to me, to the point where, you're not really providing any kind of evidence. You're just making a whole bunch of subjective claims and then expecting people to be like, oh yeah, I totally expect this with the good God as you've quote unquote defined it. But I still don't see any concrete evidence that actually grounds this God in our reality. I just hear you saying, oh, well, obviously this good God would have our kind of life pop up. So obviously that is better explained by God existing. That's not actually giving us evidence.
Right. Do you agree with the way I define evidence at the beginning? Because given that definition, it does count as evidence, unless you want to backtrack and get off that definition and accept another.
Well, I feel like the definition that you gave, to give sort of an analogy, and Aaron can correct me if I'm wrong here, it would basically be like saying, well, aliens must have visited the Earth in the past because we find strange skeletons in the geologic column. Therefore, aliens must exist. These body plans don't match anything that we have now. Therefore, aliens must have visited the Earth a long time ago. Would you agree with that the fossil record as being evidence of aliens?
Trivially, if it's expected that we see it like that, then it is evidence, but it's not supporting evidence. And the reason for that is because the posterior probability of the fossil record on evolution is higher than the posterior probability of the fossil record on the alien hypothesis. And furthermore, the alien hypothesis has certain theoretical vices which the evolution hypothesis doesn't have. We can answer why the hypothesis is supported by what we observe.
So, just to be fair, what Michael is saying, if I may butt in, what Michael is saying, based on his definitions of what he means by supporting evidence, I think what he is saying is correct, because he's being clear about what is supporting evidence and saying if this evidence is more expected on one hypothesis over the other, that's then after we do our Bayesian churning of the calculator, that it adds evidence to that hypothesis. So I think he is correct to do that, but I'm going to be pushing back in a different way. Michael, I don't think it's ultimately relevant whether life is moral or not, because your ultimate statement is life is more expected on theism than naturalism. Then you don't think the natural realm would produce life on its own, while on theism, you would expect that. So moral or not, I think ultimately your whole point is you were trying to argue from fine-tuning that life is only expected on theism and rather unexpected on naturalism. Is that correct?
I'm arguing that life is more expected on theism than a bare naturalistic hypothesis, but I'm trying to give an explanation why, because that may just seem like a brute assertion, and I wouldn't want to be accused of doing such a thing. And so my explanation is that, making life as it is morally good
doesn't actually, Michael, I'm thinking your explanation doesn't help, because if nature can produce life, whether or not it is more moral, if nature produces life, then it's the same thing anyways. Whether there is a moral dimension to life existing, that doesn't actually make naturalism more or less probable. If nature comes along and it just naturally produces life all the time, then it doesn't then have any then morality has no importance to your argument at all. I think it's really a completely unnecessary hypothesis step.
Right. So this is the issue I take with. So you're making a non sequitur there, saying that if naturalism can make life, then we don't have any worry. But you need to understand what modality can is indexed to. I'm not saying there's a logical inconsistency. Like there's no contradiction with any of the laws of logic to say that you can have naturalism plus life. All I'm saying is it's more expected. And I can explain why. If you take any naturalistic process, you're not going to take that to be infallible, right?
Okay, if you can explain why without having any kind of ad hoc or subjective premises.
What do you mean by ad hoc and subjective there, just so we can get clear? And what premises do you think I'm doing that are subjective and ad hoc?
Well, I mean, you're just tacking on that God is good. I feel is like an ad hoc thing, because you're not actually establishing that God is good. You're just outright saying that God is good without actually establishing that this God is good in some kind of way. You're just saying, oh, well, if this God is good, then he would allow this thing. And you're not actually providing a reason as to why that would be a good thing. I think that's kind of what Aaron was trying to point out earlier with that line of questioning with, well, why is this good? Why is this bad? And I just don't feel like you're actually grounding that in like reality.
Right. Okay. So two things going on there. So as I corrected you on earlier, when I'm talking about God, right, I'm talking about a theoretical entity posited by my hypothesis to explain some evidence. So I don't need to justify why the theory is as it is. I'm constructing it so as to explain some evidence. And then you can construct an opposing theory, and we can see which one better explains the evidence. This is what happens in science all the time. As for morality, I definitely think it's objective. I can give you some formal arguments. You might not like them, but I could give a Morean argument for it or something like that. And I just think it's very clearly intuitive that morality is objective. Like, if you think it's subjective, you're committed to saying that whether or not torturing children for fun, whether or not that's good or bad, that turns on the opinions of a society, a person, etc. That seems obviously wrong to me.
It does. I mean, it does depend on the society.
What's your argument for that?
Well, my argument is demonstrative in that, you can point to several different societies in the past where what we would consider today to be torturing children to be perfectly fine. There's several different Christian groups out there right now that say that.
Fine, or
Hold on, I'm still talking. I am still talking.
My apologies, sir. My apologies.
Your apologies? I was literally talking, and then you just started talking. There's no apologies about
sorry,
it.
sir.
You meant.
Go ahead.
Okay. There are Christian groups now that think that the what we would consider to be abuse, an abuse of children, is perfectly fine. All right, you all you got to do is you got to look at Mormonism. They abuse children all the time. They think it's perfectly fine. So I mean, you just you can literally demonstrate that there are things that people consider to be perfectly fine, but everybody else considers to be abusive, and that shows how this morality, this moral knowledge that you claim that we all have, is totally subjective upon the group that you're in, the society that you're in, the time and place that you're in. Like all of that makes morality a subjective conclusion. If it was not, if like your God somehow provides this moral foundation that should apply to everybody, then why haven't we been able to suss out this moral knowledge just yet? Like, it just seems rather weird to me that there's this amorphous absolute morality that exists out there that everybody should follow. Yet it seems to me like nobody seems to know what in the fuck it is. Everybody has a different opinion about what this God thinks is good, bad, right, or wrong. Everybody has different ideas about what in the fuck, what in the fuck how in the fuck to treat people. Like it seems very subjective in nature if you actually take a look at the different societies that have existed, and even societies and groups of people that exist now. So please tell me how there's any kind of objective morality other than you subjectively coming up with some kind of system that then provides you with an objective analysis of moral decisions. That's what I think exists. But you're trying to tell me that this objective or absolute morality exists out there and that it exists outside of our minds. Be able to actually prove that without being subjective in nature.
Right. Sir, do you remember the question I asked you?
Can you repeat it?
Could you provide an argument for the conclusion that morality is subjective? What you just did was equivocate and make
I fucking did. No, stop.
Let me finish.
I did.
Let me finish.
No. You see, I have the mute button, and that's what makes me all powerful. I'm basically God in this fucking situation, okay? I did give you evidence, okay? I said the evidence is demonstrative in that you can look at several different groups that exist not only now, but in the past that have different ideas of what it means to be morally good. And in the case of like torturing children, there are groups now that are perfectly fine with torturing children as the rest of society would define torturing children. They are happy to torture children. They think it's perfectly fine to torture children. So I already gave you the evidence, and then I guess I went on a long rant about subjectivity of morality and all this other stuff and how you need to provide some kind of actual evidence for objective moral values or whatever in the fuck you're trying to argue.
If I may jump in, I would say, how about we just... Yeah, I was going to say, how about we just grant for the sake of discussion, because, deciding the metaphysics of morals over a 15-minute podcast is probably going to be difficult to do. It's not like there's a gargantuan amount of philosophical literature lasting 3,000 years on this question. So let's just, for the sake of argument, accept the premise about life having inherent moral value. Let's just take it as a given, because one of the things Michael was talking about is wanting to look at the evidence, the supporting evidence. So to repeat that, basically life is supposed to have some sort of intrinsic moral value. It's better to have life than not to have life. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, I'm saying that on a theistic hypothesis where God is good and life is morally valuable, we would expect to see life. And that on a bare naturalistic hypothesis, with the hypothesis that the natural world exists, we don't have any such expectation. entity in life is support and evidence for such a hypothesis over the other. But before you go ahead, I do want to say that I'm perfectly comfortable continuing debate about the objective morality, since I think, I don't remember your co-host's name, but he made a grave, logical error when he was talking about people having certain opinions. That's completely compatible with objective morality. Moral realism doesn't make any prescriptions about whether or not people are going to have certain psychological characters and say certain things, right? Like, it's very clear that morality could be objective and people could be wrong about it. Like, for example, the earth is round, right? There are people that think it's flat. So pure disagreement doesn't, show anything about its objective nature. That's just a grave non sequitur your friend made there.
I don't think I made a non sequitur, but I'll let Aaron finish his line of questioning.
It's ultimately a question of what are we thinking about the metaphysics or morality there. And like I say, I'd rather just sidestep that for the moment, accept the premise just to continue on. So the universe should have life on it on theism. Now, may I ask the following question? How much life?
At least one entity is expected. I would probably say lots of life, or a good amount, at least enough so that people can have happiness and interact with one another, right?
So you say enough, but here's the thing. The vast majority of the universe is bereft of life, where life is actually impossible. The vast majority of the mass of the universe is in black holes. The vast majority of the universe is in the mass of black holes, in dark matter, in stars, things that biological life cannot exist in. So the vast majority of the universe automatically cannot be life-bearing. We can even look just in our own solar system, and the vast majority of the things that you could try to stand on will not be supportive of life. Heck, you can't even burrow down into the earth very far, and it becomes inhospitable to life. The moon is inhospitable. Mars is inhospitable. Venus is very inhospitable. If we are saying life is expected on theism, why is it apparently the case that almost all of the universe is devoted to non-living things if life is actually important?
Right. So I'll have 2 points. First, I think what you're saying here just kind of shows why life is not expected on naturalism. If the various 31 constants were different, then we wouldn't have life. And already we don't have a bunch of life in the universe, which shows, imagine naturalism is true, that naturalism, one moment, please let me finish this. It just shows that life is not, very likely on naturalism. But the second point I want to make is that...
Pause. You just said that the universe is fine-tuned for life, but it's also fine-tuned in such a way that life has almost a shit time ever existing. It can't be both fine-tuned for life and really shitty at making life. Those are not compatible.
That's not what I said. So what I said was, if naturalism is true, no, sir, that's not what I said. I conditionalized my statement.
The laws of physics, on fine-tuning, the nature is made in such a way that it becomes compatible for life. So why is it the case that the universe has been tuned to generate life, but the vast majority of the time it fails?
Right. So the explanation I gave earlier was the moral explanation. And that's the life.
No. You're not answering my question. Why is it that the universe is created for life, but the vast majority?
But you're not allowing me.
Mute him for a moment. Because here's the thing, Mike, you're not answering my question. You're not answering my question. I am asking, why is it that if life is moral and good and we should expect it, why is it that the vast majority of the material of the universe fails to generate life? The universe creator could have created a universe in any way it wanted and have every single rock in the universe and the stars and everything else in such a way that they could be populated with life. And yet it's not that case. That's how a universe could have been made. And if life is morally valuable, more life would be more valuable than less life. So why is it that 99.9999999% of the space, the matter of the universe is not even compatible with life, at least biological life?
Right. So, there are various explanations we could give. Yeah, okay. So one explanation we could give is that the constant couldn't be in such a way in support of the life, right? It couldn't be that we have the stars and all the matter you're talking about arranged in the way you want to say, and life would occur.
Why have stars?
Right? That might be one explanation. right?
Why have stars? Why
That's
have
not even the main
galaxies?
point.
In fact, there is this thing that theists keep telling me about of this place I want to go to that apparently I can go and live forever and have wings and things like that, and it's called heaven. Why aren't we just in heaven? Apparently, that is a conceptually realizable entity. So honestly, why isn't the universe already like heaven rather than it looks like, hey, the vast majority of the universe is not even dead?
Right, sir. I think you're going beyond the scope of what I'm saying. You're posing a different problem, which we can get to in a moment. But the main point I want to make here is
evidence, we might say.
Here, please let me finish, sir. I'm not interrupting you. Don't interrupt me. Yeah. So the main point I'm making here is just
let him go. Let him go. Let him go.
Just let me finish. If I was interrupted, I was doing it minimally, and whenever I did, I apologize thereafter. But the whole point is the fine-tuning hypothesis, as I've constructed it, minimally predicts that there's some life, and that is compatible with 99.99999 or whatever you said of the universe not being hospitable. I can't say with my accent, sir. But the whole point there is that you're going to have to give a reason why we would expect it at all on naturalism, which you haven't done.
Well, here's the thing. The universe is also what we would call really fucking big. So even if life is rare, given enough opportunities, it will appear. So the fact of the matter that the vast majority of the universe is not life-bearing, and only very rarely in a few cases for a short period of time in the history of the universe can it actually be sustained, is what you would expect on it being basically a fluke of physics and chemistry.
Why is that so, sir?
Again, as I noted, the vast majority of the mass and space of the universe is impossible for life.
Okay. How does that support what you said? Because what you said was, if everything was a cosmic fluke, right? Here, you said if everything was a cosmic fluke, i.e., if a random, naturalistic hypothesis is true, we would expect to see some life like grow over time, given how big the universe is. But I'm just asking for an argument for that because, I can give you some quotes from physicists, but Roger Penrose, for example, estimates that the odds of the initial low entropy state of our universe occurring by chance alone are on the order of 1 in 10 to the 10 times 123 power. So that's
all right. Can I pause you right there? Can I pause you right there?
What?
I'm going to hop out. I'm going to hop down this one real fast because here's the thing. What Penrose is pointing out is not an argument for fine-tuning for life. He is saying it is really weird that the early entropy of the universe was fine-tuned to such a low value. The amount of entropy we needed in the past to be for life to be existent is not so fine-tuned. It doesn't need to be fine-tuned to such a level. All that has to happen is entropy was lower in the past than it is now. So you're confusing fine-tuned as in it's some really weird particular value that it's fine-tuned to a particular end. And that is not true. The value of entropy in the early universe could have taken just about any value in the past, so long as it's less than it is now, is compatible with life, the universe, and everything as we've come to know it. So what Penrose is saying, hey, why is this really weird, strange thing? What is forcing it to that value? And not that there is something forcing it that value for the sake of life. That is an add-on that only happens when you're not carefully reading and you're probably then mining it from other sources trying to then say, hey, we got fine-tuning, therefore God.
Right, I think you're confused about what I'm saying. I'm not saying Penrose is giving a fine-tuning argument.
I'm not confused about the physics, so please be careful about that. All right.
I'm not saying you're confused about the physics. I'm saying you're confused about what I'm saying, sir. I was not taking Penrose as giving a fine-tuning argument. What I was doing was I saying,
you literally just did. You cited Penrose.
That's not what I did. I'm going to explain what I did, sir. Listen, what I was saying was that's an extremely low value, and that's something that we would expect to have, given that such entropic conditions are life conducive on an all good God. But you're saying even on a random fluke, like a random natural
pause. You have literally just made the same statement again. And I have pointed out, it doesn't even matter what the early value of entropy was. All that had to be was less than it is now for life to exist. All that has to happen is entropy to increase over time. It did not have to start at a particular value. That is what Penrose is getting at. It's this really weird small value. It doesn't need to be weirdly small for life to exist. So again, you're taking that premise about this weird bit of low entropy value and giving it a purpose, which Penrose never argued and is in fact not true. It is not the case that life needed that to be the value in the early universe for life to exist.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I was not citing Penrose as giving an argument for fine-tuning. I was citing Penrose as to say that there are these, low probabilistic conditions, such as the low entropy state at the beginning of the universe, and that we would expect such a thing on theism. Now, you may say we didn't need that specific one for life. Okay, that might be true, sir, but you're going to have to give an explanation as to why we have entropic conditions that are life conducive at all on naturalism. All right.
So the only thing that the number that you shot out earlier, as if to prove that it's it's not likely that naturalism would have produced life, all that means is that life is unlikely to occur, which is exactly what we see in the universe, and is therefore.
Actually, I need to stop you there, John, because it doesn't even say that. Oh. In fact, all this is just say, hey, this value is really weirdly small. There is, in fact, no argument you've even given, Mike, why that is expected on theism. Why on theism do you expect this particular value for early state entropy? Can you show the mathematics
why that value is life conducive?
But it's not specific to life. It could have been just about any other value. So to say it was fine-tuned for life requires evidence for that. And I'm pointing out it is not the case that it needed to be that low. In fact, it is overtuned as a way that Sean Carroll would put it. And in fact, as an argument against fine-tuning for life, because here's a value that is just way out of whack for what is actually necessary. It is overdone, and that is not what you expect on everything finely tuned, that if it was ever so slightly different, then the universe couldn't exist or life couldn't exist. It's like, no, it could have taken a whole bunch of different values, but for some reason, something is just like turning the knob and like cranking up to 11 as hard as it can for no particular reason, in the purpose of no particular reason for life. So what I'm saying, it's not evidence of fine tuning. That and a bazillion others. In fact, there's another problem when we keep talking about things being improbable. Here's the thing. What is the probability that the gravitational constant is approximately 6.6 times 10 to the negative 32, if I'm remembering that off the top of my head? What's the probability that that is what big G should be in our gravity equations?
I do not know, sir. What is the probability?
The thing is, nobody knows because there's no probability distribution that exists to explain that. We actually cannot say what is probable or improbable for these constants because they could take any value, and we don't have any reason they should follow any particular probability distribution, which means we actually cannot say that such and such constant value is improbable. It is actually mathematically impossible to say so.
Wait, so you're saying they could take any value and life still occur?
I'm saying that you cannot say any value is more probable than another in some sort of way that is actually mathematically consistent.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean, sir, because if we use probability as understood by Bayesian confirmation theory, we can do just that.
I know what probability is, and here's the thing. You need to talk about what is the prior probability, and the problem is we actually can't define that because the thing is the values can be anywhere from negative infinity to positive infinity. There's no restrictions there, and there's no reason to think some values are more probable than any other. So if you actually try working out what is like the probability density at any given point for all the possible values, you can't actually define that. You basically find that the probability is 0 for all possible constants.
Right. So you're saying there's an infinite set of ways it could be such that life is more conditionally probable?
No, you're not listening to me very carefully here. What I'm saying is because
I am listening. I'm just asking if that's what you're saying.
Probability distribution we can point to. Here's the thing. We can't actually say that some values of the constants of nature are more likely than any other. And if you try to set that as some sort of uniform distribution, that it could take any value of equal probability between negative infinity and positive infinity, if you try working out the math of what is the probability that the constant would be in any given range, it's always 0. It actually works out that you can never say how probable it is. Quite literally, this is actually something that you get in like your first couple lessons of quantum mechanics when you try describing an electron without any sort of barrier. You find out, hey, the equation actually isn't solvable. It's not mathematically consistent. I'm saying the same thing here with the constants of nature. You can't actually say the constants themselves are improbable because we can't say what the underlying probability of any particular value is.
Wait, what's the argument that we can't know the prior probability? If I'm, for example, a subjective Bayesian, the prior probability is just going to be whatever my credence in the relevant proposition is. The prior
Well,
probability
here's the thing. It's a really funny thing that you keep talking about the objectivity of morality, but you will jump to subjective Bayesianism to prove the existence of life.
Just wait.
No, wait. So I'm sorry, Michael. See, I had to mute you there, Michael. We do need to. We've got full lines, so we do need to wrap this up. If you want to say any kind of last words or anything like that, that this would be the time. But otherwise, we do have to move on.
Oh, can I say my last words, Mike?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my only point is, I think, I don't know. Could you say your names again? So I know who's who before I say Aaron and
John and John.
John?
Yes.
So, in my conversation with Aaron, I think you're getting confused about what I'm saying about the various probabilities. So, I mean, I'll just say this. The prior probability isn't being calculated by the hypothesis or by the Bayesian type of confirmation I'm going for here, right? What's being calculated is the conditional or posterior probability. And you're kind of saying that we can't know what the prior probability is, but, for example, I'm a subjective Bayesian. So I think the prior probability is just whatever my credence in the relative proposition is before examining the evidence, right? And so I'd say personally, probability of theism before examining the evidence is something like 1%, but even 1%, that's higher than what we would get if we did a conditional probability with naturalism, the calculation we got. As for my conversation with John, I just want to say, you did make a huge non sequitur when you were talking about objective morality, saying you see people say things to.
I'm sorry. No, I dropped you. I did not make a non sequitur about any fucking thing, and I let you have your final say, and that's it. And so now I'm going to have my final say. So I feel like, and maybe I was just misunderstanding where he was going with it, was that he would, regardless of what the actual number was meant to establish, I felt like what he was trying to say was that, the likelihood of life arising naturally is so low that it makes more sense for some kind of good God to create life, or to have or to be the reason why life even developed. But the problem is that you would have to literally show that the probability of life on naturalism as being zero in order to make a magical explanation more likely, because he's forgetting about the prior probabilities of like natural processes, just are the explanations for everything that we have experienced in reality. That makes any natural explanation for like life to be far more likely than a magical explanation. And I have to say, I'm so glad that I had you here there, Aaron, to sort of, come in between both me and Michael, because sometimes my brain just gets fixed on one idea and I go with it.
Yeah. I think I can understand what point he was trying to get at, in that I think we would agree that it's actually immoral to torture children, even if some societies or some subgroups of people did think so. I think that's what he's trying to get at, and that there's ultimately some objective reason that can be given. But again, because that is itself a gargantuan, a level of argumentation itself felt wasteful. And I think, just to make sure I am clear on everyone here, when he keeps talking about being a Bayesian and a subjective Bayesian, I need to ask him on how he figured out his prior probability that for example, the gravitational constant is 6.7 times 10 to the minus 11. It finally hit me. 6.7 times 10 to the minus 11 Newton meters squared per kilogram squared. Why is it that particular value? How probable is that particular value versus half that or twice that? And the thing is, you can't just say subjective Bayesian. You have to actually justify what you're going to say that background probability is. And if you say, they're all equally probable, which was my whole point, if it's just like, hey, we don't know why one value is any more probable than any other, so it's just a uniform probability, it actually works out that you can then not actually assign a probability density overall. You get nonsense results. And here's the thing. What I'm saying here is not some really super esoteric statistical thing that's hidden away. I am actually repeating something given by Timothy and Lydia McGrew, Christian apologists, who have also pointed out you can't use fine tuning because of this mathematical problem. And guess what? They're absolutely right. When the apologists are on my side, you better watch out.
Well, Well, heathens, that's going to be it for this call today. If you want more of this kind of content, you can hit up the links down in the description to go and subscribe to The Line here on YouTube. We're always producing great live content where we take callers from people. We're also adding new shows all the time. So please go down there, subscribe to The Line so that you can get more of this kind of content. I'm not sure if this was 20 seconds or anything like that, but yada, yada, yada. Jimmy, go fuck yourself.